This week on Brian Ross Investigates, the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan amid chaos and confusion and corruption. But now, hundreds of millions of dollars in American taxpayers' money is still being sent there.
Is that money going to end up in the hands of the Taliban, a terrorist group?
Well, that's the big concern.
A warning from the Inspector General overseeing money sent to Afghanistan, $380 million and counting.
Let me be blunt about this. We have seen this movie before, and unless we're very careful, the money will be diverted and potentially lost and go to terrorists.
Plus, no single group has been hit harder by the opiate crisis than Native Americans on reservations across the country.
I have two children that became addicted to heroin. There was a time I thought he's either going to go to prison or he's going to die.
How one tribe in Washington state is using settlement money from drug companies to fight the scourge.
It's challenging for us because we consider ourselves strong people and we consider ourselves independent people. We have lots of struggling families, and so we're susceptible to the folks getting caught up in the opiates.
And this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the choices made by the editors of Mediaite.
And he came out and said it showed that they won Arizona. That's an outright lie.
From the studios of the Law&Crime Trial Network in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our friends on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we begin tonight with an American scourge, not COVID-19, but the crisis with opiates that has claimed tens of thousands of lives and disrupted the lives of so many more. And no group in our country has been harder hit than Native Americans, economically disadvantaged with substandard medical care and so susceptible to the addictive power of the opiates, legal and illegal. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. And now hundreds of Native American tribes have reached a huge financial settlement with drug makers and distributors who've been blamed for their role in the crisis. Some $590 million will be distributed to tribes large and small.
One of the tribes hit hard by the opiate crisis is located just outside Seattle, the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe. It's one of the smallest tribes involved in the settlement, but tribal leaders say the money will mean a lot.
And we're joined now by W. Ron Allen, who is the chairman of the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe. Mr. Allen, thank you so much for being here. What's been the impact of these prescription drugs, the addictions on your tribe?
Most of us are living, at moderate to low income levels. We have lots of struggling families. And so we're susceptible to the folks getting caught up in the opiates. So it causes a lot of disruption to our families. They become dysfunctional, they become dependent. We have some challenges. Some will end up in other kinds of crime. And it's also spiritually for us and culturally, if I can say it that way, it's challenging for us because we consider ourselves strong people and we consider ourselves independent people. And then when you see some of your people start becoming dependent on opiates and other substance abuses, then it becomes very disruptive to the harmony of our community.
The tribe says it will use the money it gets for a new clinic on the reservation land, and Chairman Allen gave us a tour.
This is our Jamestown Healing Clinic that we have built or building with respect to treating opiate and substance abuse patients in our community.
Well, behind me is Brent Chomkowski. He's the director of our healthcare clinics. And Molly Martin is the director of this. We call this the Healing Center. The belief is that you can't heal a person of their addiction unless you heal the whole person. That includes their physical health, their mental health, and everything. And so we're going to have quite extensive wraparound services.
What's the biggest thing you have to overcome with particularly young members of the tribe who are hooked on these opiates?
Well, the biggest thing we have, really, if you want to know the truth, is the stigma. People want to come for help, but they're afraid to because of what people say about it. Everybody thinks that people are weak that have addiction. They think that they haven't found the bottom of the barrel yet. And it's amazing the lack of understanding around mental health and addiction in this country.
I'd also add in that a lot of people have misconceptions about the medications that we're using. And there's this idea that we're just replacing one drug with another, when in reality, we're giving a medication that's been shown to help people heal and shown to help improve their health and their lives without, getting them high or causing other side effects the way that illicit opiates would. And that's a big barrier for people before they ever walk through our doors, is to understand that these medicines are here to help them, not to create more problems.
And how widespread do you see the issue?
Well, this was one of the worst counties in the country at one time.
Yeah. So
Really?
S'Klallam County had, which is where we're at currently, had the largest number of opiate prescriptions across Washington state between 2006 and 2012. So we are very familiar with how significant this issue is in our community. And as illicit opiates like heroin and fentanyl become more and more readily available, we're seeing more and more people struggling with those, and we're here to help.
One of the tribe citizens working at the new clinic is Shauna Priest, whose 2 children fought addiction for years.
My son started with back pain, so was prescribed oxycodone. When he was cut off from that, he switched over to heroin. To be honest, I'm not sure how my daughter got started in it, but they were both heroin addicts starting about the same time. And I think it went on for about 7 years.
And what was that like for you as a mom?
It was something I have a hard time talking about sometimes. It was also terrifying. Several times a day, going in there, just making sure my son's chest is still moving up and down, making sure he's still alive. Finding, needles in every nook and cranny in the house. It was something that it was very, very traumatizing and very something I wouldn't wish on anybody to ever have to go through.
You were afraid you were going to lose him.
Definitely. I had high hopes, but there was a time I thought he's either going to go to prison or he's going to die. One of the two. Mm-hmm.
And was there any help you could find to help get him off this addiction?
We tried several rehabs. Believe it or not, the day he would come home, he'd go right back to it. Just nothing was helping. And then he started the monthly injections at our health clinic, and that seemed to work really well for him. And in fact, it's been 4 years now that he's been clean from heroin. Watching my kids go through it, and so from a mom's perspective, I know that there's hope, and I know that I just want to see us be able to help as many people as we can that need it. In fact, one of my proudest moments is that my son is working construction with the tribe, and he actually has helped build our new healing clinic. So that to me is something really outstanding. And my daughter is an assistant to a manager at the casino for about 3 years now. They're thriving and just doing fabulous. And I owe everything to our program.
Your tribal name means strong people, so it must be very difficult for you to see the impact.
Yes, it is. It's disappointing. I mean, we, for centuries, we have been, all tribes, including my tribe, have been dependent on the federal government. And one of our primary goals is to be independent of the federal government, and we be dependent only on our own resources. We're in the last 20 years or so, we've had great strides in achieving that objective. So it is a big deal to us, and it has a lot to do with our culture, our identity, our spirit, and we're very proud of how much we've achieved. But unfortunately, opiates is a newer challenge, along with the old, the historical substance abuses like heroin and cocaine and meth now. So it's been disappointing, but we're resilient. We get disappointed, but we don't get discouraged. We're going to defeat it.
All right. W. Ron Allen, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Coming up next, you may have thought the U.S. was done with Afghanistan, but it turns out we're still sending hundreds of millions of dollars there in humanitarian aid. Is that going to end up in the hands of the Taliban? A warning tonight from the Inspector General in charge. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTube TV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTube TV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTube TV. We put you in the jury box.
We turn now to a warning about American taxpayer money possibly getting into the hands of terrorists. As chaotic and deadly as the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was last year, it seemed the country had put Afghanistan and the $1 trillion we spent there behind us. But tonight, the Inspector General, who oversees money sent to Afghanistan, says not so fast. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. The people of Afghanistan are suffering terribly under their new rulers, the Taliban. Starvation, the collapse of medical services, women's rights trampled, and an economy in free fall. The U.S. has offered humanitarian aid, but this is a country with a legacy of corruption and a government tied to terrorists, Brian.
We're joined now by John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, who for the last decade has been watching what the U.S. has spent tens of billions of dollars and what's happened to that money. Mr. Sopko, we're out of Afghanistan now, but we're still sending hundreds of millions of dollars to Afghanistan.
You're absolutely correct, and it's a pleasure to be here, Brian. We, meaning the U.S. government, because of the humanitarian crisis, have sent over $380 million. And so has the UN is saying they need up to $8 billion because of the humanitarian crisis.
Is that money going to end up in the hands of the Taliban, a terrorist group?
Well, that's the big concern.
As you said in your recent speech, we've seen this movie before.
Yeah, yes, we have. And the concern is that we're going to spend too much money and too fast in too small a country with too little oversight. And unless we're very careful, the money will be diverted and potentially lost and go to terrorists.
As you look back on your decades running the Special Inspector General's office for Afghanistan, how much money do you think was wasted that went there of the tens of billions?
Well, that's a tough question. We've been asked by Congress on a number of occasions to document total amount lost. We gave a very conservative estimate of about 30%. It could be higher, but about $3 out of every 10 was lost to waste, fraud, or abuse.
So how do you prevent that from happening now with the money we're sending supposedly to help the humanitarian crisis?
Well, the first thing is learn from the prior mistakes. Make certain you have you agree beforehand on an acceptable amount of risk you're willing to take. And if the risk exceeds that, stop spending it. Monitor the money. See how the money is being spent. I mean, these sound like really simple proposals, but they weren't carried out in the past.
What was your reaction as you watched the rapid, chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces and personnel from Afghanistan?
Well, I think I, like anybody who watched it, were saddened by it and concerned. Myself, we had staff in Afghanistan at that time, U.S. employees, because we had the largest U.S. law enforcement and U.S. audit presence in Afghanistan at that time. So we were concerned about getting those people out, which we fortunately did.
As an Inspector General, you're independent, non-political. What do you say about the performance of the Biden administration in terms of Afghanistan?
Well, I'll just say there are plenty of mistakes that were made by all administrations. And you read our reports going back 10 years. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue of good government. And I think, I'm not going to say one administration was worse than the other. We've had multiple administrations of multiple parties, and they're all problems that we've identified.
Finally, let me ask you this. Given what's happened in Afghanistan, did we accomplish anything?
Yeah, we did accomplish quite a bit. Unfortunately, with the loss to the Taliban, a lot of those gains are in peril. And I think the most obvious one that your viewers would recognize is that we tried to bring some semblance of human rights protection for women and girls, and that is in peril. Because the Taliban, although they have said they respect women's rights, we really haven't seen much of that. So I think the gains we have made in healthcare, in education, those have all been, well, I wouldn't say totally destroyed, but they're likely to totally be lost.
John Sopko, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the choices made by the editors of Mediaite. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams Media Group. And Aidan was chosen as your winner this week, Brian Kilmeade of Fox, who broke ranks and actually called President Trump a liar. Let's look at this.
Right now, nobody cares about 2020. Nobody. And everything that he said and the challenges that he made should have been done before the election. And they did a recount in Arizona, and the recount showed no difference almost. And he came out and said it showed that they won Arizona. That's an outright lie. And please stop wasting our time with that, because he's capable of doing so much more.
Well, what do you make of that, Aidan?
Well, so this is part of an ongoing effort on behalf of a lot of Trump's media supporters to convince the former president to stop spreading lies about the 2020 election and move on to subjects that Americans actually care about. Brian Kilmeade, who is the host of Fox and Friends, Trump's favorite morning show, said there on his radio show that the 2020 election is not a priority for many Americans, despite the fact that Trump keeps bringing it up in his rallies and in his statements to supporters. That's all fair, but that comment that you played right there that Kilmeade made, which is calling specific claims that Trump has made about the 2020 election, calling them outright lies, that's really notable, and that stands out against previous comments that other Trump supporters have made. I should note that it also contrasts a lot with what other hosts at Fox News have said about this. I spoke to Pete Hegseth, a top Fox News host, recently, and I asked him if he could tell me who won the 2020 election, and he could not answer that question. So there are still many hosts out there that are struggling with that question on Fox News and in right-wing media. We wanted to give Brian Kilmeade kudos for being clear-eyed about it and saying, we know that the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden. Donald Trump challenged this in the courts, including ones which were run by Trump-appointed judges, threw all these challenges out. We know who won the 2020 election. Let's move on.
In this case, though, Brian Kilmeade said this on radio, not on his TV show.
Right, and I do think that that's notable. Brian Kilmeade's radio show obviously has a much smaller audience than Fox and Friends, which is the show that he hosts for 3 hours every day. Now, he has in the past couple of years, when Trump was president and after Trump left office, occasionally challenged the president. So I will give him props for that. But it is notable that he's saying this on his radio show and not on Fox and Friends.
Let's move on now to the loser this week, James Bennett, formerly of the New York Times, who ran the New York Times opinion page. Why is he a loser?
So James Bennett, who until recently was the top editor of the opinion pages of the New York Times, took the stand in a trial over an opinion piece the paper published a few years ago. He left the paper recently, you'll remember, over a backlash over an opinion piece that was published by Tom Cotton, calling for the military to be brought in to handle protesters over the killing of George Floyd. This trial is about a different opinion piece that the New York Times published. It was published by the editorial board, and it claimed that the shooting of then Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was incited by an ad run by Sarah Palin's super PAC. James Bennett, who was part of the editorial board at the time, inserted that line, establishing that link at the last minute. Now, there was no link between those two events, and the Times had to correct the story the next day. Now, Sarah Palin is suing the paper for defamation, and James Bennett said in testimony that he takes full responsibility for that line being added. He said that the pressing deadline of the paper going to print was what made him hastily add that line that ended up being incorrect. But it resulted in this major lawsuit and a huge headache for the New York Times. Obviously, mistakes happen for major publications like the New York Times, but this was a serious one that has resulted in a lawsuit now that threatens to challenge the First Amendment protections that the paper has.
In this case, though, he did not blame some lower-level researcher or deputy and took full responsibility and issued a correction the next day.
I think that's admirable that he took full responsibility, but it's still a serious error to establish this link of inciting violence between Sarah Palin's super PAC and the horrible tragedy that happened. The good news for the New York Times is that the press enjoys pretty good protections against defamation lawsuits. Sarah Palin and her lawyers will have to prove that they acted with actual malice and knew what they were printing was incorrect. And did so regardless, which is a really hard thing to prove and is part of the reason why the New York Times has not lost one of these defamation lawsuits in decades.
So this is a lawsuit being closely followed by everybody in the media and libel lawyers to see how it comes out. Sarah Palin versus the New York Times. It'll be a big verdict when it comes. Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thanks, Brian.
And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. And thanks to our great staff here at Law&Crime for getting us on the air and off the air every single week.